My husband and my best friend had an affair. I pretended to be a room attendant to catch them. My life, as I knew it, was unremarkably happy. A sentiment that, though plain, encapsulated all I held dear. I had managed to build a family, one that, against odds and through challenges, felt both complete and complex in its everyday normalcy. My husband, John, a charming and spirited man of 37, stood at the center of my universe. Our journey together hadn't been straightforward or easy. He had come into our marriage with baggage, a son from his previous marriage and a past tangled with unresolved issues that led to his divorce. His ex-wife had struggled with personal demons, leaving John to shield their son, Daniel, from the fallout. When John and I married 7 years ago, I welcomed both into my life with open arms, embracing Daniel as my own. Now 8, Daniel had grown into a thoughtful, quiet boy whose moments of laughter were both rare and precious. Daniel lived with us full-time, his presence a constant reminder of the life John had before me, a life I had willingly stepped into. I treated Daniel with all the affection and care I would my own flesh and blood, and in many ways he was just that to me. Our bond was strong, despite the initial adjustment and the invisible lines that blended and blurred over time. 3 years after marrying John, we welcomed another boy into our world. Noah. Noah, with his father's eyes and an infectious smile, was a living testament to the happiness and love John and I shared. At 5 years old, Noah was the light of our household, often pulling Daniel into his childish games, which Daniel indulged in with a patience beyond his years. Our life in a cozy suburban neighborhood was filled with the typical hustle and bustle of family activities, school events, weekend soccer games, and family dinners noisy with chatter and laughter. John, with his job that often put him in the public eye locally, was a well-known figure in our community. This visibility never seemed to affect our quiet home life. Instead, it filled it with a sense of pride. We laughed more than we argued, a balance I had come to cherish deeply. My best friend, Kathy, had been by my side since our college days. She was married to a wealthy businessman who, while providing a life of luxury, failed to meet her deeper needs, especially in their bedroom. Kathy often confided in me about her marital frustrations, her voice a mixture of envy and despair when she compared her emotional and sexual dissatisfaction with the vibrancy she saw in my marriage. She was always there, a fixture in my life, sharing everything with me as I did with her. Despite her personal discontent, Kathy's frequent visits and our daily conversations never hinted at anything amiss. She was Aunt Kathy to my boys, a role she relished despite her own lack of desire for children. Her presence was a comfort, an echo of a past we both shared and held on to through our transitioning lives. Our families intertwined, not out of necessity but choice. Kathy and her husband often joined us for barbecues and birthday parties, seeming just another branch of our extended family tree. These gatherings, filled with laughter and casual joy, painted a picture of harmony. John had always been a loving and attentive husband. His expressions of affection were frequent and heartfelt, whether it was a surprise bouquet of flowers or a simple note left on the fridge saying how much he loved me. But slowly, I began to notice shifts in his behavior. At the time, they seemed insignificant, but now they scream with meaning. There were evenings when John would come home from work, his face drawn, not with the usual fatigue of a long day, but with a pensiveness that seemed to cloud his eyes. When I asked if everything was all right, he would flash me a brief, tight smile and assure me everything was fine, attributing his mood to an especially challenging day. His eyes, once so quick to meet mine, now often diverted away, as if holding my gaze was too much to bear. Then there were the text messages. One night, lying beside him as he typed away on his phone, I glanced over, curious about who he was texting so late. He quickly angled the screen away and said it was just a work email he had to respond to urgently. His expression was too calm, too practiced, and it prickled my senses with unease. But I pushed those feelings away, chastising myself for being overly suspicious. With Kathy, the changes were even more pronounced, though cloaked in subtleties that only in retrospect reveal their true weight. She had always been open and vibrant, sharing every detail of her life with an almost brutal honesty. But as the months passed, her vivacity dimmed. She became more reserved, her laughter less frequent, and her visits shorter. When she did come over, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and there was a hesitation in her actions, as if she were constantly on the verge of saying something more but thought better of it. I remember one particular afternoon when Kathy and I met for lunch. She seemed unusually distracted, her eyes flicking to her phone every few minutes. I jokingly asked if she had a secret lover she was keeping from me. She laughed it off, but there was a flash of something in her expression. A flicker of guilt, perhaps, that made me pause. Then she quickly changed the subject, gushing about a new restaurant she wanted us to try, and the moment passed. Our conversations, once filled with earnest depth, had taken on a superficial quality. She asked about my life and my family, but it was as if she were going through the motions. I shared stories of John and the kids, unaware that each word might sting her conscience. Looking back, I can pinpoint moments when her discomfort was most palpable, especially when I spoke about John with affection and pride. One evening, the four of us, John, Kathy, her husband, and I, had dinner at our place. I noticed how Kathy's laughter seemed forced, how she and John accidentally exchanged looks they both quickly smothered. It was as if they were both in a play, each performing their part but with subtle falters that only a discerning eye could catch. After they left that night, the air felt charged, heavy with unspoken words and unasked questions. John was unusually quiet, retreating into a shell I couldn't seem to penetrate. When I asked if he was okay, he brushed it off, mumbling something about being tired. His eyes avoided mine, and there was a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there earlier. These signs, these tiny cracks in the facade of our daily lives, were forming a pattern I only now fully see. The pain of realizing that not only was my husband unfaithful, but that my best friend was his accomplice cuts deeper than anything I've ever felt. It shakes the very foundation of what I believed my life to be, leaving me to wonder how I missed the signs when they were so clearly there, painting a picture of betrayal right before my eyes. The day I discovered the devastating truth started like any other. It was a sunny Tuesday, and I was busy organizing the house while Noah played in the living room. My phone buzzed with the arrival of a message. Expecting it to be a reminder or a message from a family member, I checked it casually. What I saw wasn't either. It was an anonymous text, simply stating a hotel name and room number. The sender was unknown, and my heart sank with a dreadful premonition. Confusion and fear mingled with a sharp sting of betrayal as I read and reread the message. Why would someone send me this? Was it a mistake or something more sinister? Despite every rational part of me screaming to dismiss it, the seed of doubt had been planted. I arranged for my neighbor to watch Noah, giving some vague excuse about an unexpected errand. My hands shook as I drove to the hotel, the address burning in my mind with every mile that passed. As I parked the car, my breaths were short, each one heavier than the last. I walked to the room, my legs feeling like they could give out at any moment. Standing outside the door, I hesitated, the fear of what I might find on the other side gripping me. But I had to know. I mustered all the courage I had left and knocked softly. "Come in. Why are you taking so long? Help me clean up my spilled wine," a familiar voice called from inside. It was Kathy's voice, casual and irritated. My heart pounded against my chest as I pushed the door open, pretending to be a hotel employee. The scene before me was like a still from a nightmare. My husband, John, was out on the balcony, his back to the room, seemingly caught up in a phone call. Kathy was sprawled on the bed, a glass of wine tipped over on the bedside table, its contents staining the crisp white sheets. I bent down, pretending to clean up, my hands trembling as I grasped the cloth. Kathy continued to talk, unaware of who I really was. "You know, he's the only one who can satisfy me," she said, a moan of contentment lacing her voice as she referred to my husband. "I've always been so jealous of her, living such a perfect life," she added bitterly. I froze, the cloth in my hand forgotten. Her words echoed in the room, each syllable slicing through me like a blade. Kathy's words hung in the air, suffocating and undeniable. I struggled to process them as my world began to collapse in slow motion. She spoke of her husband next, deriding him as physically weak and inadequate. The casual cruelty of her words, the ease with which she dismissed her vows, shook me to my core. I stood there, my disguise as a cleaner forgotten, staring at the tableau of betrayal. My husband, my best friend, the two people I trusted most in the world, had shattered the life we'd built together. My presence still unnoticed, I watched as John turned from the balcony, his face lighting up as he saw Kathy. The affection in his eyes was unmistakable, and it wasn't directed at me. Nausea overwhelmed me. I backed away, the room spinning. Somehow, I stumbled out before they saw me, my heart breaking with each step. Outside, the cool air hit my face, doing nothing to ease the heat of my shame, anger, and sorrow. I barely made it to the bushes before vomiting, my body physically rejecting the weight of what I had just witnessed. The drive home was a blur, my mind replaying the scene over and over, each detail another dagger to my heart. How long had this been going on? How could they do this to me, to our family? The questions spiraled, unanswered, leaving me drowning in despair. I arrived home to the sound of Noah laughing as he played. The normalcy of the scene was a stark contrast to the chaos within me. I stood there, watching him, tears streaming down my face, as I wondered how I could reconcile the world I thought I knew with the deceit I had just witnessed. That night, after Noah was in bed, I sat alone in the darkness of the living room, waiting for John to come home. The waiting was excruciating, each minute stretching into an eternity. When he finally walked through the door, his smile faltered at the sight of me. My red-rimmed eyes and pale face must have betrayed more than I intended. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. It sounded hollow, rehearsed. I couldn't find the words. How could I confront him? How could I articulate the depth of my pain and betrayal? The anonymous message from the morning nagged at me, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Its origin was still a mystery, but it had brought me to the truth. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I waited until John went to bed, slipping quietly out of the room to make a phone call. The house was silent, shadows dancing on the walls from the dim glow of the streetlights outside. With shaking hands, I dialed the anonymous number from the text. My heart raced as it rang, the tension in my chest nearly unbearable. Finally, the call connected. "Hello!" The voice on the other end was immediately recognizable, though I had never expected to hear it in this context. It was Kathy's husband, Mike. "Why did you send me that message?" I asked, my voice shaking with confusion and anger. There was a pause, heavy and telling, before he answered. "I thought it was time you knew the truth. When did you find out?" I pressed, needing to understand why he, of all people, would be the one to expose this. "I've had my suspicions for a while," Mike admitted. "I confirmed it a few days ago. I saw them together, much like you did today." His words stung. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the casualness of their deceit, how easily it unraveled to those paying attention. "Why tell me this way? Why not confront Kathy, or even John?" Mike sighed, his bitterness evident. "Because Kathy's never been honest with me. Not really. I knew she married me for my money, but I thought maybe there was something more. Eventually, I wanted to hurt her the way she hurt me. By ripping apart the facade she's been living with you, with everyone." His words revealed a pain and vindictiveness that made me shudder. His retaliation was meant to wound deeply and indiscriminately. "But did you think about how this would affect me, my family?" I asked, my voice breaking under the weight of my emotions. "I did," he admitted, his voice softening. "And I'm sorry for the collateral damage. I didn't want to hurt you or your kids. You deserve better than this, all of you. I couldn't see any other way to make her feel the consequences of her actions." Mike's motives, though rooted in his own heartbreak, had thrust me into a nightmare. His actions, however justified in his mind, had ripped apart my family and exposed wounds that might never fully heal. I ended the call, my thoughts racing. The betrayal I faced wasn't just personal. It was now entangled with the chaos of another broken marriage. I sat in the darkness, my mind swirling with unanswered questions. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. My life would never be the same. The days following my conversation with Mike were consumed with a storm of emotions and unanswered questions. The betrayal was raw, and the weight of what to do next loomed heavy over me. Confrontation was inevitable, but the outcome was far from clear. John returned home from work late the next evening. The tension in the house was palpable as he walked through the door. He greeted me, his voice tinged with a forced normalcy, as though sensing something was amiss but hoping to avoid a confrontation. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. John froze for a moment, his shoulders tensing before he turned to face me. "Of course," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. We sat at the kitchen table, a place where we'd shared so many happy moments. Family dinners, laughter, plans for the future. Tonight, it felt like a battleground. "I know about you and Kathy," I said, cutting through the silence. John's face fell, his expression a mix of shock and guilt. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Don't bother denying it," I continued, my voice trembling but resolute. "I saw you both. I heard what she said." John lowered his head, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I'm so sorry," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "Sorry?" I spat the word, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, John. You betrayed me, our marriage, our family. How could you do this? With her, of all people." He took a deep breath, his voice filled with shame. "I don't have an excuse. It just happened. I didn't plan for this, I swear. But Kathy, she was there and I was weak. I know I've ruined everything." His confession was both a relief and a dagger to my heart. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. But the pain of hearing him admit to his betrayal was almost unbearable. "Do you love her?" I asked the question I dreaded most. John hesitated, and in that moment of silence, my heart broke all over again. "I don't know," he finally said. "I thought I did. But now, I don't know what I feel anymore." His answer was worse than I imagined. If he had said no, I could cling to some hope of repairing our marriage. If he had said yes, at least I'd know where I stood. But his uncertainty left me in limbo, a state of emotional purgatory. "I need time," I said, standing abruptly. "Time to think, to figure out what's next. You need to stay somewhere else for a while." John nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "I understand. I'll pack a bag tonight, The next day, I knew I had to confront Kathy. My betrayal wasn't just about John. It was about the person I had trusted most in the world outside my marriage. I called her, my voice cold and measured. "We need to talk. Can you come over?" Kathy hesitated before agreeing, her voice tentative. She knew. She had to know. When she arrived, she looked pale and anxious. "I guess you know," she said quietly, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. "Yes, Kathy." "I know," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. How could you? How could you do this to me, to my family?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered. "It started out as, I don't know, a distraction. But then, don't you dare try to justify this." I snapped, my anger finally breaking free. "You destroyed everything. You destroyed us. And for what? A fleeting thrill? A betrayal of trust so deep I can't even begin to describe it." Kathy sobbed, but her tears felt hollow. I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. This wasn't about her pain, it was about mine. In the days that followed, I began the arduous process of piecing my life back together. I consulted a lawyer, determined to protect myself and my children. John and I had a difficult conversation with Daniel, explaining in the simplest terms possible that things were going to change. Noah was too young to understand, but his questions about why Daddy isn't home tore at my heart. John moved out, renting a small apartment nearby to remain close to the boys. He was remorseful, desperate to make amends, but I couldn't forgive him. Not yet, maybe not ever. As for Kathy, our friendship was beyond repair. The woman I had once considered a sister was now a stranger to me. Her presence a painful reminder of the trust she had shattered. Life didn't magically get easier. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, days when the weight of betrayal felt too much to bear. But I refused to let John and Kathy's actions define me or my future. I focused on my children, on creating a stable and loving environment for them. Slowly, I began to find strength in the support of family and friends, in therapy sessions that helped me process the pain and anger. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I deserved better. And so did my boys. The weeks turned into months as I gradually adjusted to my new reality. First, everything felt foreign. The house seemed quieter, emptier without John. The evenings were the hardest, once filled with family dinners and shared laughter, now punctuated by moments of loneliness and introspection. But amidst the pain, I began to rediscover myself. I focused on my career, throwing myself into work with a renewed sense of purpose. My job, which I had once seen as a means to support our family, now became a source of personal fulfillment and independence. It felt empowering to carve out a space for myself in a world that had felt so unstable for months. Therapy became a lifeline, not just for me but for Daniel and Noah as well. Daniel, at 8 years old, struggled to process the changes. He was old enough to sense the tension but too young to fully understand its complexities. Noah, at 5, asked simple, heartbreaking questions like, "Why doesn't Daddy live here anymore?" Our therapist helped me navigate these conversations, teaching me how to be honest with my children without overwhelming them with adult problems. She also helped me confront my own feelings of betrayal and inadequacy. For months, I had wondered if I could have done something differently, if I had missed signs or neglected some aspect of our relationship that led John to stray. Through therapy, I learned to let go of that self-blame. John and Kathy's actions were not a reflection of my worth but of their own failings. It was a liberating realization, one that allowed me to focus on healing rather than dwelling on what could not be changed. One of the most surprising sources of strength came from Daniel. Though he was quiet and reserved by nature, he had a maturity beyond his years that shone through during this difficult time. He began taking on small tasks around the house, helping with Noah in ways that showed a deep sense of responsibility and care. "Mom, it's going to be okay," he said one evening, his small hand resting on mine as I sat at the kitchen table, overwhelmed by a rough day. "We're still a family." His words, simple but profound, brought me to tears. I avoided Kathy for months. Even the thought of seeing her filled me with anger and sadness. But eventually I knew I needed closure. For myself, not for her. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground where emotions could be contained. She looked different, smaller somehow, as though the weight of her choices had physically diminished her. "I'm so sorry," she said as soon as we sat down, her voice trembling. "I'm not here for an apology," I replied, my tone calm but firm. "I'm here to tell you that I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to let go of this anger for my own sake." Kathy's tears flowed freely, but I didn't offer comfort. I had nothing left to give her. I hope you find a way to fix your life, I added, standing to leave. But I can't be a part of it anymore. Walking away from that conversation felt like shedding a heavy burden. John remained a constant presence in the boys' lives, and I worked hard to maintain a civil relationship with him for their sake. We established a co-parenting schedule, and though it wasn't easy at first, we both prioritized our children above our personal grievances. He apologized repeatedly, not just for the affair but for the pain it caused our family. While I appreciated his remorse, I knew reconciliation wasn't in the cards. Too much trust had been broken, and the person I once saw as my partner now felt like a stranger. In the process of healing, I began to reconnect with old passions that had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. It became a form of therapy, a way to process my emotions and express myself in ways words couldn't. I also joined a local book club, met new people, and slowly expanded my social circle. These small steps helped me rebuild a sense of identity outside of being a wife and mother. One evening, as I watched Daniel and Noah playing in the backyard, their laughter filling the air, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving forward. For the first time, I could see a future not defined by betrayal but by resilience and love. My love for my children, my family, and for myself. "Nam, come play with us," Noah called, his smile as bright as the setting sun. I joined them, running barefoot on the grass, laughing freely for the first time in months. The journey wasn't over, but I was stronger than I had been. Betrayal had tested me in ways I never imagined, but it had also shown me my own strength. With each passing day, I grew more confident in my ability to create a life filled with love and joy, not despite the hardships but because of them. For Noah, for Daniel, and for myself, I was determined to turn this chapter of pain into one of hope and renewal.